The cherry blossoms I'd bought at the florist 3 towns over were wilting in my hands as I stood in my childhood home's dining room doorway. I'd taken my first personal day in 8 months, fought through 2 hours of construction traffic on Interstate 75, and stopped at 4 different stores to find the perfect gift for Mom's 62nd birthday. But there in my usual chair sat my 9-year-old nephew, Tyler. Chocolate cake smeared across his cheeks as he demolished what looked suspiciously like the salmon dinner I'd specifically requested when Mom asked what I wanted. The wrapped jewelry box containing the pearl earrings she'd admired last Christmas felt heavy in my jacket pocket. "Mom, where should I sit?" I asked, scanning the full table. She glanced up from pouring wine, shrugged with the casual indifference reserved for discussing weather, and delivered words that would replay in my mind for months. "He deserves it more than you do, Ron. You're used to being alone anyway." I didn't say another word. Couldn't really. The flowers dropped from my numb fingers onto the hardwood floor as I turned and walked straight back through the front door I'd entered with such excitement just minutes earlier. My Honda Civic felt like a refuge as I sat behind the steering wheel engine off, trying to process what had just happened. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves from someone's yard cleanup, a smell that usually brought comfort, but now felt suffocating. My phone buzzed against my leg. Jessica's name lit up the screen with a message that made my stomach drop. "Don't be so sensitive, Ron. It's just dinner. Tyler's had a rough week with the divorce and all." Just dinner. 26 years of family gatherings, and my sister reduced my humiliation to just dinner. But as I stared at her words, more messages began flooding in. The notification count climbed 4 7-Eleven messages in rapid succession. I opened my phone to find myself tagged in a group chat I'd never seen before, one clearly created without me. The messages painted a picture I wasn't prepared for. Mark, my older brother, had written 3 days ago. "Ron's gonna throw one of his dramatic fits about the seating arrangement, watch. Dude thinks he's special because he has some tech job in the city." My mother had responded, "Maybe it'll teach him that family isn't about money or showing off. Tyler needs to feel important too." Jessica had added, "Honestly, it's weird how much he tries to insert himself into everything. Like, we get it, you're successful. Some of us have real problems." The timestamps showed this conversation had been active for weeks. Dozens of messages discussing my issues, my desperate need for attention, my obvious loneliness that makes everyone uncomfortable. They dissected every interaction I'd had with the family over the past 6 months, turning innocent moments into evidence of my supposed character defects. One message from my father particularly stung. "The boy needs to learn his place. Can't have him thinking his money makes him better than the rest of us." His money. The money I'd been sending them for everything from car repairs to medical bills to Christmas presents for the grandkids. The money I'd earned working 60-hour weeks while they portrayed me as some kind of entitled outsider, desperate for their approval. But the worst discovery came when Jessica's next message included a screenshot she'd clearly sent by mistake. It showed another group chat, this one including my aunts and uncles, where my mother had written, "We've decided Ron needs to understand that Tyler is the priority now. He's Mark's son, and Mark actually lives here and helps out. Ron just swoops in with his guilt money and expects to be treated like royalty." Guilt money. That's what they called the $600 I'd sent last month, when Mom said they couldn't afford Dad's prescription medications. The $800 I'd contributed for Tyler's school supplies, when Mark claimed his construction work wasn't bringing in enough. The $1,200 I'd given them for emergency car repairs that I now realized probably never happened. I scrolled through months of messages I'd been excluded from watching my family dissect my personality, my choices, my loneliness, like amateur psychologists who diagnosed me as a pathetic figure, worthy only of their pity and occasional financial exploitation. The planning for tonight's humiliation became clear. They'd deliberately set up a scenario designed to put me in my place, to remind me that despite my education and career success, I was still the odd one out who could be dismissed whenever convenient. The group chat revealed something even more disturbing. This wasn't the first time they'd orchestrated my exclusion. References to the Christmas thing and Easter Sunday suggested a pattern of deliberate isolation disguised as family dysfunction. They'd been writing me out of their lives while keeping me just close enough to serve as their personal ATM. As I sat in the gathering darkness of early evening, the cheerful yellow porch light of my childhood home mocking me through my windshield, I realized that everything I'd believed about my relationship with my family had been carefully constructed fiction. They didn't see me as the responsible son who'd moved away but stayed connected. They saw me as a convenient source of emergency funding and a convenient target for their collective frustration with their own limitations. The final message in the thread came from Mark. Mission accomplished. He looked like someone shot his dog. Maybe now he'll stop acting like he's doing us some big favor by showing up. The 20-minute drive back toward the highway gave me time to think, and thinking led to a clarity I'd been avoiding for months. Instead of heading home immediately, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, ordered coffee I didn't want, and opened my banking app under the harsh fluorescent lights. What I discovered made the dinner table humiliation seem like a gentle nudge compared to a sledgehammer blow. 18 months of bank statements told a story of systematic financial manipulation that took my breath away. The emergency car repair fund I'd sent Mark in March, $900 that I'd borrowed against my own credit card because he'd claimed his transmission had died and he'd lose his job without transportation had been deposited on a Tuesday. That same week, Mark's social media showed photos of his brand new base boat, a gleaming 20-foot Ranger with all the accessories posed proudly in his driveway with the caption, "Early birthday present to myself." The medical emergency fund I'd wired to my mother in June, $1,300 for what she'd described as urgent diagnostic tests her insurance wouldn't cover, had coincided perfectly with her week-long spa retreat in Sedona, Arizona. The Instagram photos showed her getting massages, meditation classes, and expensive organic meals while texting me about how blessed she felt to have such a caring son during this difficult time. Every emergency I'd helped solve had been accompanied by lifestyle upgrades they'd hidden from me while expressing gratitude for my sacrifice during their time of need. The roof repair fund became a hot tub installation. The heating system emergency became a kitchen renovation. The school expenses for Tyler became a new motorcycle for Mark. But the pattern went deeper than simple lies about specific expenses. As I scrolled through payment after payment, I realized I'd been subsidizing their entire standard of living, while they portrayed themselves as barely scraping by. The streaming service subscriptions I'd offered to cover temporarily during Mark's supposed unemployment had been running for 14 months, during which time his construction company's website showed completed projects worth tens of thousands of dollars. The grocery delivery service I'd set up for my parents during Dad's recovery period had been delivering premium organic foods and expensive wines, while Dad texted me photos from his weekend fishing trips. The insurance premium I'd taken over when they'd claimed financial hardship covered vehicles I'd never seen, including Mark's motorcycle and a vintage Mustang that Jessica had been posting photos of herself driving. The lawn service I'd arranged and paid for had expanded to include weekly pool maintenance for the above-ground pool they'd installed, without mentioning it to me. I'd been living in a studio apartment driving a 10-year-old Honda and eating ramen noodles twice a week, so I could help my family through what I believed were temporary financial difficulties. Meanwhile, they'd been living better than I was, using my money to fund luxuries while saving their own income for toys and entertainment. The most devastating realization came when I calculated the total. Over the past 18 months, I'd transferred $23,400 to various family members for various emergencies and ongoing expenses. $23,000 that represented my entire emergency fund, my vacation savings and money I'd borrowed against credit cards, because I'd believed my family was struggling. During those same 18 months, I'd declined invitations from friends because I couldn't afford restaurant meals, postponed dental work I'd needed because the insurance didn't cover everything, and turned down a weekend getaway with coworkers because I'd already spent my discretionary income on family emergencies. I'd been living like someone barely making ends meet while my family enjoyed luxuries, funded by my misplaced sense of obligation and their expertly crafted lies. But knowing the scope of their deception also gave me power I hadn't possessed that morning. I opened each app and website, methodically canceling every service and subscription connected to my family. The Netflix account that served 3 households went dark. The Spotify Premium Family Plan that included 6 users got terminated. The grocery delivery service received a cancellation notice. The landscaping company got a call instructing them to send final bills to Mark directly. The insurance payments stopped with a single phone call. The utility company received instructions to transfer the accounts back to my parents' names. The phone plan that covered 4 devices suddenly covered only 1. Even the premium cable package I'd been paying for since my father's supposed medical leave got disconnected. Each cancellation felt like removing a leech that had been slowly draining my blood, while I'd mistaken it for a family heirloom worth preserving. By the time I'd finished, I'd freed up over $1,900 in monthly expenses that I'd been carrying for people who viewed my generosity as both an entitlement and a source of entertainment. The waitress refilled my coffee without being asked, probably recognizing the expression of someone processing a life-changing realization. As I transferred money back from shared accounts and updated automatic payments, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: financial breathing room. The constant low-level stress of stretching my income to cover multiple households evaporated, replaced by the strange sensation of having discretionary income again. But even that relief was overshadowed by the deeper betrayal the bank statements revealed. This hadn't been a family struggling through difficult times who'd gradually become dependent on my help. This had been a coordinated effort to extract as much money as possible from someone they'd identified as both financially capable and emotionally manipulable. They'd turned my love for them into a business model. I was 40 minutes into the drive home when my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Dad's contact photo filled the dashboard screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won over caution, and I accepted the call. "Ron, your mother's crying," he said without preamble. "You embarrassed her in front of Tyler. That boy doesn't understand why his uncle just walked out on his grandma's birthday." The manipulation was so effortless, so practiced, that I almost fell into the familiar pattern of apologizing and explaining myself. Instead, I found myself asking, why was Tyler in my seat eating my meal? "Don't be dramatic. It's just a chair. Tyler's been having a hard time with his parents' situation, and Linda thought he'd feel better being treated special. You're 28 years old, Ron. Act like it." "Where was I supposed to sit?" The pause lasted long enough for me to pass 2 highway exits. "There's always room for family. You just decided to throw a tantrum instead of adapting like a mature adult." The call ended without goodbye, leaving me alone with the highway noise and the growing realization that I'd never heard my father take responsibility for anything in my entire life. Every problem was someone else's overreaction. Every conflict was caused by other people's failure to accommodate whatever decision he and my mother had already made without consultation. I'd been home for less than 10 minutes when my phone buzzed with a photo message from Dad's number. The timestamp showed 8:52 p.m., and the image that loaded on my screen stopped me cold in the middle of unlocking my apartment door. Tyler sat cross-legged on what had been my childhood bed, wearing my old Letterman jacket from high school track team. The jacket I'd left in my bedroom closet because Mom had said it meant too much to her for me to take it when I'd moved out 6 years ago. Tyler was grinning at the camera chocolate still smeared on his face from the birthday cake, making peace signs with both hands, like he was posing for a victory photo. But Tyler wearing my jacket wasn't what made my hands shake as I stared at the phone screen. Behind him, my entire childhood bedroom had been transformed into what was clearly Tyler's permanent living space. The twin bed I'd slept in for 18 years now had superhero sheets and a dozen stuffed animals. My old desk where I'd done homework and built model airplanes was covered with video game controllers and action figures. The bookshelf that had held my collection of science fiction novels was stocked with children's picture books and board games. They hadn't just given Tyler my room for a sleepover or a temporary stay during his parents' divorce proceedings. They'd erased me from my own childhood bedroom and installed their preferred grandson as my replacement. But the detail that made my vision blur with rage was visible on the dresser behind Tyler's shoulder, a framed family photo from what was clearly last year's Christmas morning. The timestamp in the corner read, December 25th, and it showed Tyler surrounded by my parents, Mark and Jessica, all in matching pajamas, surrounded by opened presents under a fully decorated tree. Last year's Christmas morning. The Christmas morning I'd been told was canceled because my mother had come down with severe flu and didn't want to risk spreading it to anyone. The Christmas morning I'd spent alone in my apartment eating Chinese takeout and watching old movies while feeling guilty about the relief of not having to navigate family dynamics during the holidays. I enlarged the photo with trembling fingers, studying the details that confirmed my growing suspicion. More framed photos were visible on the dresser and nightstand, creating a gallery of family moments that chronicled years of gatherings I'd never been told about. Birthday parties with elaborate decorations, graduation celebrations, holiday meals, vacation photos from trips I'd never heard mentioned, summer barbecues where everyone wore matching t-shirts I'd never been offered. The realization hit me like a physical blow I hadn't been gradually excluded from family events due to scheduling conflicts or natural drift. I'd been systematically written out of their lives while being told these events weren't happening at all. They'd created two versions of their family story, one that included me as the distant son, who was too busy with his career to participate, and another that was their actual life rich with connection and celebration, and traditions that had been deliberately hidden from me. I called Jessica immediately, not caring that it was almost 9 p.m. or that she'd already demonstrated her position on the evening's events. She answered on the first ring. "Ron, come on. Dad said you're upset about some photo. Tyler's just a kid who likes your old stuff." "What photo?" I asked. I didn't tell Dad about any photo. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear what sounded like television audio in her background. "I don't know what you mean." "Jessica, I'm looking at a photo Dad just sent me of Tyler in my old room, and there's a framed picture from Christmas morning last year. The Christmas morning Mom said was canceled because she was sick." Another pause. "Ron, you're reading too much into things. Was I invited to Christmas last year? You know how crazy the holidays get. Everyone was dealing with Mark's divorce and Tyler needed stability, and Mom was stressed about cooking for everyone." "Everyone? How many people were there, Jessica?" "I don't remember exactly. It wasn't a big deal." "Shh. Jessica, how many Christmases have I missed because I was told they were canceled?" This time the pause included muffled conversation, as if she was covering the phone to talk to someone else. When she came back, her tone had shifted from defensive to annoyed. "Ron, you need to stop making everything about you. We're a family with complicated dynamics, and sometimes things happen organically. Tyler needed us last Christmas, and it worked out better with a smaller group. You would have been welcome if you'd just shown up." But I hadn't been told there was anything to show up for. I'd been specifically told there was no Christmas gathering because of my mother's illness. The photos on Tyler's dresser told a different story, one where I'd been deliberately excluded while being fed lies to prevent me from asking uncomfortable questions about why my absence was so easily accommodated. As Jessica continued her explanation about organic family dynamics and my tendency to overthink situations, I found myself studying the photo more closely. The wrapped presents under the tree, the elaborate breakfast spread visible on the dining room table in the background, the professional quality of the photography itself all suggested this hadn't been a last-minute gathering thrown together during someone's recovery from illness. This had been a planned traditional Christmas morning celebration that had required preparation coordination and intentional guest list management. I'd been sending them money for Christmas gifts while they'd been celebrating Christmas without me. I'd been alone on the holiday while they'd been building memories and traditions designed to exclude me while maintaining my financial contributions to their lifestyle. The photo wasn't just evidence of their deception. It was a trophy documenting their success at erasing me from their family narrative while keeping me close enough to serve as their personal bank account. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler grinning in my Letterman jacket, surrounded by the evidence of years of celebrations I'd been told never happened. By 3 a.m., I gave up on rest and made coffee stronger than I'd ever needed before. The laptop screen cast blue light across my kitchen table as I began what would become the most thorough investigation I'd ever conducted into anything. My background in software engineering had taught me how to trace digital footprints, and my family had left a trail wider than they'd probably realized. Social media became my starting point. I'd been blocked from most of their accounts months ago, supposedly to avoid drama during Mark's divorce. But there are always ways to see public posts and tagged photos from mutual friends. What I discovered made the Christmas photo look like a minor omission. My cousin Rachel, who lived 2 states away, but stayed connected with everyone through Facebook, had posted dozens of photos over the past 3 years that told the story of a family life that had existed parallel to everything I'd been told. 4th of July barbecues where my parents wore matching American flag shirts, Easter egg hunts in their backyard where Tyler collected prizes in a basket I'd never seen, Thanksgiving dinners with elaborate table settings and enough food for 12 people. Each holiday I'd been told was too stressful to organize this year, or canceled due to illness, had actually been celebrated with extended family members I'd grown up with, but somehow never encountered anymore. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in months had been regular attendees at gatherings I'd never been invited to attend. But the social media investigation revealed something even more disturbing than holiday exclusion. My family had been telling people I was going through some kind of personal crisis that made me unreliable for family events. Comments on Rachel's photos asked about my well-being and expressed sympathy for my parents having to deal with Ron's situation. One comment thread from last Thanksgiving made my stomach turn. My Aunt Carol had written, "I hope Ron gets the help he needs. It must be so hard on Linda and Frank to watch their son struggle like that." My mother had responded, "We're taking it one day at a time. The important thing is keeping Tyler's environment stable while Ron works through his issues." My issues. They'd been portraying me as someone struggling with unspecified mental health or personal problems that made me unsuitable for family gatherings. The successful software engineer who'd been supporting them financially had been rebranded as a troubled son who needed space to work through his difficulties, while his family maintained their traditions without the disruption of his presence. The investigation deepened when I started looking into public records. Property tax information showed that my parents' house, which they'd claimed was in danger of foreclosure when they'd asked for help with mortgage payments, had been completely paid off 14 months ago. The emergency mortgage assistance I'd provided had coincided with them eliminating their house payment entirely using my money to clear their debt, while telling me they were struggling to make minimum payments. Mark's construction business, which he'd described as barely surviving during economic downturns, had been awarded municipal contracts worth over $150,000 in the past year alone. The unemployment benefits he'd claimed to be receiving while asking for grocery money had ended 8 months ago when his business income had disqualified him from further assistance. But the most shocking discovery came when I searched court records related to Mark and Jennifer's divorce proceedings. The financial disclosure documents, which were public record, showed assets and income levels that contradicted every sob story I'd been told about their struggles during the separation. Mark owned 3 vehicles, including the motorcycle I'd seen in photos and a vintage Corvette I'd never heard mentioned. His business had gross revenues of over $200,000 the previous year. Jennifer, who'd supposedly been left destitute by the separation, was listed as co-owner of a rental property that generated monthly income higher than my salary at my tech job. They weren't struggling financially. They weren't barely making ends meet. They weren't facing emergencies that threatened their basic survival. They were living comfortably on incomes that exceeded what most American families earned, while telling me stories of hardship designed to extract additional funding for lifestyle upgrades they wanted but didn't need. The rental property discovery led me to more research that revealed Jennifer and Mark weren't actually divorced. The proceedings had been suspended 6 months ago, when they'd reconciled, but they'd never told anyone in the family about getting back together. They'd been living in the same house, running their businesses together, and maintaining their marriage while letting everyone believe Jennifer was a struggling single mother, and Mark was a divorced father fighting for custody. Tyler's difficult adjustment to his parents' divorce was complete fiction. His parents had been together the entire time, using their supposed separation as justification for additional family support and sympathy, while actually working together to rebuild their financial portfolio. I spent the remaining hours until dawn, documenting everything I'd found, creating a folder of screenshots, public records, and financial documents that told the story of a family that had turned manipulating me into a collaborative art form. They hadn't just been lying about individual emergencies or expenses. They'd constructed an entire alternative reality where they were struggling victims of circumstances beyond their control while actually living better than I was, on income streams they'd never mentioned. But the investigation also revealed something I hadn't expected to find allies. My grandmother, my father's mother, lived in assisted living an hour away and had been asking family members about my absence from gatherings for months. Comments on photos showed her repeatedly questioning why I wasn't present for holidays and birthdays with my parents, providing vague responses about my being too busy or going through a difficult time. A private message to Rachel yielded the information I needed to contact Grandma Dolores directly. At 84, she was sharper than most people half her age, and had been suspicious of my family's explanations about my absence from her great-grandson's life. "Ron, honey, I've been wondering when you'd call," she said when I reached her at 7:30 that morning. "I've been asking your parents about you for months, and their stories don't add up. Are you really having some kind of breakdown, or is there something else going on?" For the first time in hours, I felt like laughing. Grandma, there's definitely something else going on. Grandma Dolores had been married to a man who'd run a small business for 40 years, and she recognized financial manipulation when she heard about it. After I spent an hour walking her through everything, I'd discovered her response was immediate and practical. "Honey, you need to protect yourself legally, and you need to let people know the truth before they dig themselves deeper into this hole they've been digging. But you also need to be smart about how you handle this." She was right. Confronting my family directly would give them opportunity to coordinate their responses, delete evidence, or escalate their manipulation tactics. Instead, she suggested I take time to build a complete case while allowing their lies to unravel naturally. The first step was reaching out to other family members who'd been asking questions. Rachel, it turned out, had been suspicious for months about why I'd been absent from so many gatherings, while Tyler seemed to be present for everything. She'd been told I was dealing with work stress that made family events overwhelming for me, but she'd noticed that my social media showed me living a normal life with friends and coworkers. "I kept meaning to call you directly," she admitted during our phone conversation. "But your mom said you were really sensitive about your situation, and that family contact was making your anxiety worse. I didn't want to upset you by bringing up things you might not be ready to handle." The manipulation had been comprehensive. They'd not only excluded me from family events, but had also cut off potential support from extended family by portraying me as too fragile to handle direct contact. Anyone who might have questioned my absence or reached out to check on me had been warned away by stories of my supposed mental health struggles. But Rachel wasn't the only family member who'd been wondering about the inconsistencies in my parents' explanations. My Uncle Tom, Dad's younger brother, had been asking questions about my absence from family gatherings for over a year. He'd been told the same stories about my work stress and mental health difficulties, but he'd also noticed that I seemed fine during the brief interactions we'd had at public events, like my cousin's graduation party. Something didn't smell right. Tom told me when I called him that afternoon. "You seemed like yourself when I saw you in May, but your parents kept talking about you like you were on the verge of some kind of breakdown. Either you're the best actor in the family, or they've been telling stories that don't match reality." Tom had his own concerns about my parents' financial situation. They'd asked him for money twice in recent months, claiming emergency expenses that needed immediate attention. Both times he'd offered to pay the vendors directly instead of giving them cash, and both times they'd declined his help with excuses about preferring to handle payments themselves. "Your dad asked for $800 for urgent plumbing repairs that couldn't wait for insurance processing. When I offered to call my plumber and have him bill me directly, your dad said the guy they'd already hired only accepted cash payments. What plumber in 2024 only takes cash for emergency work?" The pattern of financial manipulation extended beyond their relationship with me. They'd been testing similar stories with other family members looking for additional sources of emergency funding, while maintaining the appearance of people overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. But Tom's most valuable information concerned my grandmother's will. "Your mom's been pressuring Dolores to remove you as a beneficiary because of your supposed mental health problems. She keeps telling Dolores that leaving you money would be enabling your difficulties, and that the inheritance should go to Tyler instead, since he's the one who's really part of the family. They'd been trying to write me out of my grandmother's will while simultaneously extracting money from me for fake emergencies. The scope of their long-term planning was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Armed with information from Tom and Rachel, I began implementing a strategic response that would expose their lies without giving them time to coordinate damage control. The first step was contacting their church, where they'd apparently been collecting sympathy and possibly financial support based on stories about their troubled son who'd abandoned his family. Pastor Williams remembered me from the years when I'd attended services during college breaks. When I called to clarify the stories that had been told about my situation, he was immediately concerned about the discrepancies between my apparent mental state and the descriptions my parents had provided. "Ron, your parents have been asking for prayers for your well-being for over a year now. They've described you as someone struggling with depression and isolation who'd cut contact with the family. But you sound fine. And if you're calling to clarify the situation, that doesn't match what they've told us about your mental state." The church hadn't provided financial assistance to my family, but they'd been including me in prayer lists for people struggling with mental health crises, and several congregation members had expressed concern about my parents' stress levels while dealing with their son's problems. "I think there's been some miscommunication about my situation," I told Pastor Williams. "I'd appreciate the opportunity to attend services this Sunday and speak with anyone who's been concerned about my family's well-being." The second step was documenting the evidence in a format that could be shared if necessary. I created a comprehensive timeline that included bank statements, screenshots of social media posts, public records, and witness statements from extended family members. The documentation told the story of a systematic campaign of financial and emotional manipulation that had been coordinated across multiple family members over several years. But I also followed Grandma Dolores' advice about protecting myself legally. A consultation with a lawyer friend who specialized in family financial disputes confirmed that I had grounds for pursuing civil action if I chose to do so. The fraudulent use of emergency stories to extract money combined with the deliberate exclusion from family events while maintaining financial obligations, constituted a pattern of exploitation that courts took seriously. "You're not talking about small amounts of money or minor misunderstandings," attorney Sarah Chen explained. $23,000 extracted through false pretenses combined with systematic emotional manipulation crosses the line into actionable fraud. You have documentation witnesses and a clear pattern of behavior that shows intent to deceive. But legal action would be a last resort. The goal was family accountability and relationship repair, not financial revenge or public humiliation. The documentation served as protection in case their manipulation escalated, but the real objective was creating space for honest conversations about family dynamics that had been distorted by years of systematic deception. The immediate effects of my investigation were already becoming visible. When my family's various subscription services and financial support systems began shutting down, their comfortable routine was disrupted in ways that forced them to confront the reality of their dependence on my support. Mark called first around noon, the day after my parents' birthday dinner. His tone was casual, as if he was checking in on a minor technical problem. "Hey Ron, our Netflix account isn't working. Did something happen with the payment?" "I canceled it yesterday," I replied. "Why would you do that? We've been watching a series with Tyler and Linda was in the middle of her cooking shows. Can you just restart it? I can pay you back later." "Mark, when were you planning to pay me back for the emergency transmission repair from March?" The pause was long enough for me to hear background noise that sounded like power tools confirming that he was working his construction job instead of dealing with the unemployment crisis he'd described. "That's different, Ron. That was an emergency. This is just a streaming service. I'm discontinuing all the services I've been paying for. You'll need to set up your own accounts if you want to continue using them." "Ron, come on. Don't be petty. Mom's really upset about last night, and now you're taking it out on everyone by cutting off stuff we depend on." The casual entitlement in his voice was remarkable. After months of lying about emergencies and financial hardship, he was treating my decision to stop paying for their entertainment as an unreasonable escalation of a minor family disagreement. But as the day progressed, the calls became more frequent and less casual. Jessica called about the Spotify account. Dad called about the lawn service. Mom called about the grocery delivery service. Each conversation followed the same pattern confusion about why I was suddenly canceling services, attempts to minimize the significance of the previous evening's events, and requests to restore services, while promising to discuss payment arrangements later. None of them acknowledged the lies they'd been telling about their financial situations. None of them addressed the systematic exclusion from family events. None of them showed any awareness that their stories about emergencies and hardships had been exposed as calculated deceptions. By evening, their tone had shifted from casual confusion to frustrated entitlement. "Ron, you're being ridiculous," Jessica said during her third call of the day. "We're family. You don't just cut off family because of some misunderstanding about dinner seating." Some misunderstanding about dinner seating. She was still characterizing the evening's events as a minor issue about furniture arrangements, rather than a deliberately orchestrated humiliation designed to put me in my place. But I'd spent months being trained to apologize for their manipulation and take responsibility for their emotional reactions. This time I refused to accept blame for consequences they'd created through their own deceptive behavior. "Jessica, I'm discontinuing financial support for people who've been lying to me about their circumstances while excluding me from family events. That's not a punishment. That's a natural consequence of the choices you've all made." The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, but not before I heard her tell someone in the background, "He's really lost it now. I think this is more serious than we thought." They were already working on their next manipulation strategy, painting my refusal to continue enabling their deception as evidence of a mental health crisis that justified their previous treatment of me. But this time I had allies who knew the truth documentation that proved their lies, and the financial freedom that came from no longer supporting people who saw my generosity as both entitlement and weakness. The breaking point came on Thursday morning when Mark and Jessica showed up at my office building unannounced. I was in the middle of a project meeting when our receptionist called to say I had visitors in the lobby who claimed it was a family emergency. Mark was pacing near the elevator bank, clearly agitated, while Jessica sat in one of the lobby chairs, scrolling through her phone. Both of them looked like they'd dressed carefully for the visit, probably hoping to present themselves as concerned family members dealing with a relative's unreasonable behavior. "Ron, we need to talk," Mark said as soon as he saw me. "This has gone far enough. You can't just cut off the whole family because you're mad about some birthday dinner." The lobby of our tech company was open and modern, designed to accommodate client meetings and casual conversations. But it was also public space where my colleagues could observe interactions, and Mark's aggressive tone was already drawing attention from people waiting for elevators. "We can go to the conference room," I offered, hoping to contain whatever scene they were planning to create. "No, we're not here for some formal meeting," Jessica interrupted. "We're here because you're acting crazy and Mom's worried sick about you. You need to stop this tantrum and restore the accounts you canceled." Several of my co-workers had paused their conversations to listen, and I could see our security guard taking notice of the raised voices. Mark seemed oblivious to the audience he was creating as he continued his demands. "Tyler keeps asking why his uncle is mad at him. Mom can't afford to pay for all these services you just cut off without warning. And that lawn guy showed up yesterday demanding payment for 2 months of work you apparently didn't tell anyone you'd stopped covering." "Mark, I'm not discussing family finances in my workplace lobby. If you want to have a conversation, we can schedule something private." "Private?" Jessica stood up, her voice carrying across the marble floors. "You've been hiding from the family for weeks and now you want privacy? You owe us an explanation for why you're destroying everyone's lives over some perceived slight." The security guard was walking toward us now, probably responding to the volume of their voices and the increasingly hostile body language Mark was displaying. Other employees had stopped pretending not to listen, and I could see several people recording the interaction with their phones. "Sir, is everything all right here?" The security guard addressed me directly, but his attention was focused on Mark, who was gesturing emphatically while speaking loudly enough to echo off the lobby walls. "These are family members," I explained, "but they need to leave." "We're not leaving until you fix this mess you've created," Mark said to me, then turned to the security guard. "This is my brother, and he's having some kind of breakdown. We're just trying to help him." The public declaration of my supposed mental health crisis, delivered to my workplace in front of colleagues and security personnel, was clearly intended to humiliate me into compliance. But it had the opposite effect. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt liberated by the clarity of their manipulation tactics. "Mark, Jessica, I'm not having a breakdown. I've discovered that you've been lying to me about your financial situations while excluding me from family events and telling people I'm having mental health problems. I've chosen to stop providing financial support to people who've been deceiving me. If you want to discuss this further, you can call me to arrange a private meeting." "Deceiving you?" Jessica's voice rose to a near shout. "You're the one who's lost touch with reality. Mom's been worried about you for months because you're isolated and paranoid, and this proves she was right." But the public nature of their scene was working against them instead of for them. My colleagues could see 3 adults having a disagreement about family finances, with 2 people loudly demanding money and services from someone who was remaining calm and requesting privacy. The narrative of a breakdown victim being confronted by concerned family members didn't match the behavior they were displaying. My manager, David, had emerged from the elevator and was observing the situation with the expression of someone trying to assess whether he needed to intervene in a workplace security issue. "Everything okay, Ron?" he asked, positioning himself where he could hear the conversation without appearing to intrude. "It's fine, David. Just a family disagreement about finances. Mark and Jessica were just leaving." "No, we're not leaving," Mark said louder than before. "And you're not going back upstairs until you call Mom and apologize for the stress you're putting her through." The demand was so outrageous, so completely disconnected from normal adult interaction, that several people in the lobby actually laughed. A security guard in a corporate office building was watching two people demand that a third person call his mother and apologize as if they were children on a playground, requiring adult intervention. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice or leave the building," the security guard told Mark. "This is a workplace, not a family counseling center." "You don't understand," Jessica jumped in. "Our brother is having a mental health crisis and he's cut off all financial support to our parents. They can't afford their medications or their utilities because he's taken away money they depend on." But her explanation contradicted everything Mark had been saying about temporary service cancellations and birthday dinner misunderstandings. Now they were claiming my parents depended on my financial support for basic survival needs, which painted a very different picture of the family dynamics they'd been describing. David stepped closer, his expression shifting from mild concern to professional interest. "Ron provides financial support for your parents' medical expenses. He's been helping with some monthly bills," I answered honestly. "But I've recently discovered that the emergency situations I've been helping with haven't been accurately described." "Accurately described?" Mark was practically sputtering with indignation. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the transmission repair I paid for happened the same week you bought a bass boat, Mark. It means the medical emergency fund I sent Mom coincided with her spa vacation. It means Tyler's school supply money went toward your new motorcycle." The public revelation of their deception created a moment of silence that stretched long enough for everyone in the lobby to process what they'd just heard. My colleagues were looking at Mark and Jessica with expressions of understanding that suggested they'd dealt with manipulative family members themselves. "You've been tracking our spending," Jessica asked, her voice shifting from outrage to something that sounded like panic. "That's creepy and controlling, Ron." "I've been tracking my own bank statements, Jessica. Every dollar I've sent for emergency expenses has coincided with luxury purchases that nobody mentioned when asking for help." David's expression had shifted to what I recognized as his problem-solving mode, the analytical mindset he applied to complex technical challenges. "So you've been providing emergency financial assistance based on information that turned out to be inaccurate." That's one way to put it. The conversation was clearly over. Mark and Jessica had expected to embarrass me into submission by creating a public scene that portrayed them as concerned family members dealing with an unreasonable relative. Instead, they'd exposed their manipulation tactics to an audience of professionals who were perfectly capable of recognizing financial deception when they heard it described. "You're going to regret this," Mark said as the security guard escorted them toward the exit. "Mom and Dad are going to write you out of everything. Tyler's going to grow up knowing his uncle abandoned his family over money." But the threats sounded hollow after their public display of entitlement and manipulation. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I realized that my colleagues had just witnessed the exact behavior pattern I'd been dealing with for years. Demands for financial support combined with emotional manipulation and threats of family exclusion when their tactics didn't work. The incident in the lobby became a turning point that shifted my perspective from defense to empowerment. Instead of feeling guilty about setting boundaries with manipulative family members, I felt proud of maintaining my composure while they'd revealed their true characters to an audience of witnesses. That afternoon brought news that confirmed my investigation had been more accurate than I'd hoped. Tom called to tell me that my grandmother had received a visit from my parents that morning, during which they'd attempted to convince her that my behavior in the lobby proved I was having a breakdown that made me unsuitable for inheritance. "But Dolores is nobody's fool," Tom explained. "She asked them to explain exactly what you'd done wrong, and they couldn't give her a coherent answer. According to them, You've had a mental health crisis because you stopped paying for their cable television and landscaping service. Grandma Dolores had also done some investigation of her own. She'd called Pastor Williams to ask about my family's situation, and he'd shared his confusion about the discrepancies between my parents' descriptions of my mental state and my actual behavior during their phone conversation. She knows they've been lying about your condition, and she's furious about their attempts to manipulate her will based on false information. I think you're going to want to give her a call tonight. But the day's biggest revelation came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Mark's supposedly ex-wife sent me a Facebook message that evening asking if we could talk privately about the family situation. I've been hearing different versions of what happened yesterday, and I think there are some things you should know about the stories Mark's been telling everyone. We met for coffee the next evening at a shop near her house, where she revealed that she and Mark had never actually divorced. They'd separated briefly 8 months ago, but had been living together again for 6 months, while maintaining the fiction of their divorce for family sympathy and financial advantages. Mark convinced me that pretending we were still separated would help with his custody case if we ever really did split up, she explained. But it was really about getting money from your parents and you for Tyler's expenses, while we were both working full-time and didn't need help. Tyler's difficult adjustment to his parents' divorce was completely fictional. His parents had been together throughout the entire period when my family had been expressing concern about his emotional well-being and using his situation to justify their exclusion of me from family events. Tyler's been confused about why Uncle Ron stopped coming to family parties, but not because of any divorce trauma. He asks about you because you were always nice to him, and nobody's given him a real explanation for why you're not around anymore. Jennifer also revealed that Mark had been boasting to her about his success in manipulating me into covering their expenses, while they'd saved money for investment opportunities. He called it the Ron Fund, and said you were so eager to help that you never asked for proof of the emergencies you were paying for. But her most shocking revelation concerned Tyler's relationship with my extended family. Mark and your parents have been telling Tyler that he's your replacement in the family. They've told him that Uncle Ron used to live in that bedroom, but that now it's his because he's the important grandson. They've made him think it's normal that families replace people who don't show up enough. They'd been teaching a 9-year-old child that family love was conditional and that people could be replaced if they didn't meet unstated expectations for participation and compliance. The psychological damage they were inflicting extended beyond their manipulation of me to include harm to Tyler's understanding of family relationships and security. I want out of this whole situation, Jennifer said. Mark's convinced that you'll come back and apologize because you always do, but I think he's underestimated how tired you are of being treated like a bank account with legs. She was right about Mark's expectations. But she was also right about my exhaustion with patterns of manipulation that had been ongoing for years. The difference was that now I had information allies and financial freedom that gave me power to choose how family relationships would function going forward. 6 months later, I was sitting in my grandmother's assisted living facility, helping her sort through photo albums that told the story of our family's history across 4 generations. The woman who'd raised 5 children during the Depression and buried a husband after 53 years of marriage had perspective on family dysfunction that put my situation in context. "Families go through cycles, honey," she explained while pointing to a photo of my great-uncle Walter, who'd been estranged from his siblings for 15 years over a business dispute that nobody could even remember the details of by the time he died. Sometimes people get so caught up in being right that they forget how to be family. My immediate family had spent 3 months escalating their attempts to force me back into my previous role as their financial support system and emotional punching bag. The tactics had ranged from guilt trips about Tyler's confusion over my absence, to threats about being written out of wills, to claims that my behavior was damaging my parents' health and reputation in their community. But they'd also spent those 3 months dealing with the natural consequences of their deceptive behavior. Without my subsidies, they'd been forced to adjust their lifestyle to match their actual income. Mark had discovered that maintaining a boat motorcycle and classic car required ongoing expenses that his construction business couldn't comfortably support. My parents had learned that premium cable packages and weekly lawn service weren't necessities when their budget was limited to their actual retirement income. More importantly, their lies to extended family and community members had unraveled as people asked questions about the discrepancies between their stories and observable reality. Pastor Williams had gently confronted them about their misrepresentations of my situation. Tom and Rachel had stopped accepting their explanations for my absence from family events. Other family members had begun questioning the emergency expenses they'd been asked to contribute toward when my parents' lifestyle didn't match their claims of financial hardship. The turning point had come in February when my mother called me directly without demands or manipulation to ask if we could meet for coffee to discuss rebuilding our relationship. The conversation was awkward and painful, but it was also honest in ways that our family interactions hadn't been for years. We convinced ourselves that we were protecting Tyler's place in the family, she'd explained. Mark was so worried that you'd never have children of your own, and that Tyler wouldn't have the stable extended family he'd need during the divorce. We thought if we made Tyler feel central to family celebrations, it would give him security. But Tyler's security had come at the cost of my exclusion, and their financial deception had been separate from their concerns about grandchild relationships. I don't know when helping with your bills turned into expecting you to solve every financial inconvenience we encountered. Somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing you as our son and started seeing you as our safety net. The conversation had led to family therapy sessions that included my parents, Mark, Jessica, and eventually Tyler, who deserved to understand the adult conflicts that had been affecting his relationship with his extended family. The process was difficult and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also the first time in years that our family had engaged in direct communication about problems instead of manipulation, exclusion, and financial exploitation. Mark had been the most resistant to accountability, initially maintaining that his deception about boat purchases and motorcycle expenses was justified because I'd been showing off my financial success while his business struggled with seasonal variations. But therapy had helped him recognize that asking for emergency assistance while making luxury purchases was fraudulent regardless of his feelings about our comparative income levels. I was jealous, he'd finally admitted during one of our sessions. You got the college education and the career that lets you live comfortably, and I felt like you were judging me for staying local and working with my hands. When you offered to help with expenses, it felt like charity from someone who thought he was better than me. But his jealousy had led him to construct elaborate deceptions that had damaged our relationship far more than honest conversations about money and family dynamics ever could have. I kept telling myself that you could afford to help and that you'd never miss money you were giving away anyway. I didn't think about how lying to you about why I needed help was treating you like someone I didn't respect or trust. Jessica had recognized that her role in coordinating the family's exclusion of me from events had been motivated by her desire to avoid conflict between Mark and me during gatherings. I thought if we just kept you two separated during Mark's divorce situation, we could avoid arguments and drama that would upset Tyler and Mom. But instead of solving the problem, I created bigger problems by letting you think events weren't happening at all. The family therapy process had also included education about healthy financial boundaries and communication. We'd learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies that justified asking for help and lifestyle preferences that should be funded through personal budgets. We'd practiced direct communication about family events and guest lists instead of exclusion disguised as canceled celebrations. Most importantly, we'd addressed the damage that had been done to Tyler's understanding of family relationships. At 9 years old, he'd been confused by the adult conflicts, but had also absorbed messages about love being conditional and family members being replaceable when they didn't meet expectations. Tyler needs to understand that Uncle Ron's absence wasn't because he did anything wrong, and it wasn't because families replace people. Our family therapist had explained. He needs to see adults taking responsibility for their mistakes and working to repair relationships instead of writing people off. The repair process had included Tyler and me spending time together outside of the family group dynamics that had been affected by adult conflicts. We'd gone to baseball games, visited museums, and done the normal uncle-nephew activities that had been interrupted by his parents' manipulation tactics. Gradually, he'd stopped asking why I'd been mad at the family and started enjoying our relationship without the weight of adult drama. But the most meaningful change had been my relationship with my grandmother, who'd become my closest family connection during the months when my immediate family had been working through their accountability process. She'd shared stories about other family conflicts she'd witnessed over the decades, helping me understand that dysfunction and repair were both normal parts of long-term family relationships. The difference between families that survive and families that destroy themselves is whether people are willing to admit their mistakes and do the work to fix them, she'd told me. Your parents and Mark and Jessica have been doing the work. That's what matters. She'd also updated her will to ensure that Tyler's college education would be funded regardless of future family conflicts, and she'd established a trust that would prevent anyone from manipulating inheritance issues to control family relationships. Family money shouldn't be a weapon, she'd explained. It should be a foundation that helps people build their own lives. As spring turned to summer, I found myself genuinely enjoying family gatherings for the first time in years. The dynamic had shifted from obligation and manipulation to voluntary participation in relationships that felt authentic and respectful. Mark had started his own therapy to address the insecurity and jealousy that had motivated his deceptive behavior. Jessica had learned to communicate directly about conflicts, instead of managing them through exclusion and gossip. My parents had adjusted their lifestyle to match their actual income while maintaining their dignity and independence. Tyler had flourished in the healthier family environment, showing signs of increased emotional security and improved relationships with all the adults in his life. He'd moved back to his own bedroom, and my childhood room had been converted into a hobby space that my parents used for quilting and woodworking projects they'd always wanted to pursue. The financial boundaries we'd established had actually strengthened our relationships by removing the underlying resentment and exploitation that had poisoned our interactions. When my family needed help with genuine emergencies, I was able to provide assistance without feeling manipulated or taken advantage of. When they wanted to purchase luxury items or upgrade their lifestyle, they took responsibility for funding those choices through their own resources. But the most significant change was the end of the systematic exclusion and deception that had characterized our family dynamics for years. Holiday celebrations included everyone who wanted to participate with honest communication about planning and expectations. Birthday parties and family milestones were shared experiences instead of opportunities to demonstrate favoritism or manipulate family hierarchies. The July 4th barbecue at my parents' house felt like a genuine celebration of family relationships that had been rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. Mark's business was thriving without the need for emergency financial assistance, and he'd developed pride in his work that wasn't threatened by my different career path. Jessica had returned to college to finish her nursing degree, funded through student loans and personal savings, rather than family manipulation. My parents had found happiness in retirement activities that they could afford comfortably within their actual budget. As I watched Tyler play catch with his grandfather while Jennifer and Mark worked together to prepare hamburgers on the grill, I realized that the family I'd always wanted had been possible all along. The dysfunction and manipulation hadn't been inevitable features of our relationships. They'd been choices that could be changed through honesty, accountability, and commitment to treating each other with respect. The man who'd driven away from his mother's birthday dinner feeling humiliated and excluded had been replaced by someone who understood his own worth and refused to accept treatment that violated his dignity. But more importantly, the family that had used financial manipulation and emotional exclusion to manage their insecurities had been replaced by people willing to do the difficult work of building authentic relationships. Standing in the backyard, where I'd played as a child, surrounded by family members who now treated me as someone they genuinely valued rather than a resource to be exploited. I understood the life lesson that had emerged from months of conflict and repair. Family relationships thrive when they're based on choice rather than obligation, honesty rather than manipulation, and mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The journey from that devastating birthday dinner to this peaceful summer afternoon had taught me that walking away from toxic dynamics isn't abandonment. It's creating space for healthy relationships to develop. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who've lost their way is to stop enabling their destructive behavior and give them opportunity to find better ways of connecting. Tyler ran over to show me a baseball card he'd found in his grandfather's collection, his face bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who felt secure in his family relationships. As I helped him identify the player and explain the statistics on the back of the card, I realized that this was what family was supposed to feel like: natural, supportive, and free from the weight of adult manipulation and financial exploitation. The photo my father had sent that cold evening 6 months ago had been intended as a symbol of my replacement in the family narrative. Instead, it had become the catalyst for rebuilding relationships that were stronger and more authentic than what we'd had before. Sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives become doorways to the healing and growth we didn't know we needed. What experiences have you had with setting boundaries in difficult family relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding the difference between healthy family support and manipulation disguised as love. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize your own worth in the relationships that matter most to you.